It was one of those evenings that seemed ordinary in every way. The sun had just dipped below the trees, leaving a soft orange glow over the quiet streets. A teenage boy was driving home from basketball practice, his backpack tossed in the passenger seat, music playing low from the car speakers. He was tired but happy, thinking about how good the game had gone and how his mom would be proud when he told her about the winning shot he made during practice. He wasn't in a rush. He liked taking the long way home sometimes. The streets were calm, and the air carried that faint smell of summer mixed with asphalt after a warm day. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and thought about what he'd eat for dinner. Maybe leftovers. Maybe his mom had cooked something new. She usually worked late, but she always tried to make sure he had something to eat. Then, out of nowhere, he saw flashing blue and red lights behind him. The sound of a siren cut through his music. His heart jumped. For a second, he thought maybe they were heading somewhere else. He looked around to see if another car was being pulled over. But no. Those lights stayed right behind him. He felt a quick mix of confusion and nervousness. He checked his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding. The car registration was up to date. His seatbelt was on. Still, the lights didn't go away. His stomach tightened as he slowly pulled over to the side of the road, just like his mother had always told him to do. He turned off the music, rolled down his window, and waited. The air outside was still. He could hear the distant hum of traffic on another street and then footsteps approaching. 2 police officers walked toward his car, their flashlights shining even though there was still some daylight left. The boy took a slow breath. His mom had talked to him many times about what to do if he ever got stopped. Keep your hands where they can see them. Be respectful. Don't make sudden moves. Speak calmly. She'd made him practice it, actually. Back then he thought it was over the top, but now he understood why she was so serious about it. Good evening, officer, he said softly as one of them came up to his window. License and registration, the officer said, his tone sharp but not shouting. The boy nodded right away. It's in my wallet, he replied. Can I reach for it? The officer gave a small nod, flashlight still aimed at him. The boy slowly moved his hand, trying to be as careful as possible. His fingers trembled a little as he pulled out his license and handed it over. He then reached for the glove compartment to get the registration papers. The second officer stood slightly behind, looking around the car, hand resting near his hip. The boy noticed the posture and tried not to focus on it. He told himself to stay calm, just like his mom would want him to. After a few seconds, the first officer looked at the license and frowned slightly. Where are you headed? He asked. Home, sir. I just finished basketball practice, the boy said. Where's home? Over on Maplewood Drive, just a few blocks away. The officer nodded but didn't seem satisfied. You fit the description of someone we're looking for, he said. The words hit like a small shock. Description? The boy repeated quietly. I don't understand, the officer didn't explain. He just told the boy to step out of the vehicle. The boy hesitated for half a second, not out of defiance but confusion. Sir, did I do something wrong? He asked. Step out of the car, the officer repeated, louder this time, so he did. His legs felt shaky as his sneakers touched the pavement. The air outside was cooler than inside the car, but he barely noticed. He could feel the weight of the 2 officers' stares, the bright beam of the flashlight crossing his face. One of them asked him to place his hands on the hood. The metal was still warm from the drive. He could feel his heart beating through his fingertips. As he stood there, he couldn't help but think about his mom. She was probably still at work. She always said she wanted to make the world safer, fairer. She worked for the government. Something she didn't talk much about, but he knew she dealt with serious cases. She'd always told him that fairness wasn't just a word. It was something people had to fight for. Now, standing there under the flashing lights, he wondered what she would think if she saw this. The officers talked quietly behind him, voices low. He couldn't hear everything they said, but he caught bits and pieces. Possible match. Check the plate. Stay alert. He wanted to speak, to explain again that he was just coming home from practice, that there must be a mistake, but he didn't want to make things worse. So he stayed still, just like he was told. Cars passed by slowly, their headlights catching the scene for a moment before moving on. Some drivers stared. Others didn't want to get involved. A woman walking her dog stopped on the corner, watching. The world kept moving, but for him, time seemed frozen. After what felt like forever, one of the officers came back to him. "You said you're coming from basketball practice?" "Yes, sir," he said. "At Jefferson High." The officer stared for a moment. "Mind if we check the car?" The boy didn't know what to say. He remembered what his mother had told him. He had rights, but also that arguing could make things worse. "Do I have to?" he asked quietly. The officer tilted his head as if the question itself was suspicious. "You hiding something?" "No, sir," he said quickly. "You can look." The officer nodded, signaling the other to open the car door. The boy watched as they searched through his gym bag, his backpack, even under the seats. His things were handled roughly, his notebook tossed aside, his shoes moved around. Inside, the boy's heart ached. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was something else, something that felt like disbelief. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he was being treated like he had. One of the officers finally came back, shaking his head. "Nothing in there," he said to his partner. The first officer sighed, then looked back at the boy. "All right, you can relax," he said, as if it had been a casual misunderstanding. The boy nodded slightly, but his body stayed tense. "Can I go now?" he asked. "Hold on," the officer said. "We're still running your plates." He leaned against the car, trying not to show how shaken he was. He could feel his phone buzzing in his pocket, probably his mom checking in. But he didn't dare reach for it. He just let it vibrate again and again. Minutes passed slowly. The street that was once calm now felt like a stage, and he was the main act. People from nearby houses peeked through windows. The woman with the dog was still there, now holding her phone up like she might be recording. Finally, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled. The voice said something he couldn't make out, but both officers relaxed slightly. The first one came over. "All right," he said. "You can go." The boy nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you, sir." He got back into the car, his hands trembling as he started the engine. The officers didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They just walked back to their cruiser, talking quietly between themselves. He pulled away slowly, watching the flashing lights fade in his rearview mirror. His chest still felt tight. He tried to breathe, to shake it off, but the feeling stayed. He glanced at his phone and saw 3 missed calls from his mom. He didn't know how to tell her what had just happened. He knew she'd be upset, more than upset. But right now he just wanted to be home. As he drove, the street seemed different, less peaceful, less familiar. He thought about how quickly things could change. One minute he was just a kid driving home after practice. The next he was treated like someone dangerous. He tried to make sense of it, but he couldn't. He wasn't angry yet, just quiet, confused. When he finally turned onto his street, he saw the warm light coming from his house window. It was comforting, but also bittersweet. He parked, sat in silence for a moment, then took a deep breath before stepping out. He didn't know it yet, but the night wasn't over. His mother would soon find out, and everything that had just happened, every second of fear, every harsh word, every flash of light would soon take on a whole new meaning. He sat in his car for a long moment after pulling into the driveway, just staring at the steering wheel. The street outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually made him feel safe. Tonight, it only made him feel small. The soft sound of the engine humming was the only thing filling the silence. He finally turned it off and sat there, hands still trembling slightly. He could see the porch light glowing. His mother had left it on, like she always did when she expected him home. He reached for his phone and saw more missed calls. He thought about calling her back right away, but he didn't know what to say. How could he even explain what had just happened? He opened the car door and stepped out. The air felt cooler now, brushing against his face. Every sound, the chirping of crickets, the faint rustle of leaves, felt louder than usual. He walked up the path to the front door, took a deep breath, and went inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and the pasta his mother had made earlier. A small lamp in the living room was still on, casting a warm glow across the room. He dropped his backpack near the door and sank into the couch, staring blankly ahead. His chest still felt heavy, like the whole world had pressed down on it. A few minutes later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made him glance toward the window. His mom was home. He could recognize the sound of her car anywhere. The door opened and she walked in, holding a folder under one arm, her jacket slightly wrinkled from a long day. "You're up late," she said softly, setting her keys on the table. "I was worried when you didn't answer my calls." He looked at her, trying to find the right words. "I got stopped," he finally said. She frowned, not quite understanding yet. "Stopped? You mean by the police?" He nodded, the look on her face changed. Calm at first, then sharp. Alert, like a switch had flipped inside her. She came closer, lowering herself to sit on the edge of the coffee table across from him. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said quietly. He hesitated. He didn't want to make her angry, but he knew she needed to know. So he told her everything. The lights, the siren, the orders to step out, the way they searched the car, the way they looked at him like he didn't belong. He told her how he stayed calm, how he remembered every rule she'd ever taught him. She listened without interrupting. Her hands were clasped tightly together, and her jaw clenched slightly. When he finished, the room fell silent. "Did they give you a reason?" she asked finally. "They said I fit a description," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they didn't say who or what, they just checked everything and let me go." She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "This shouldn't have happened," she said, more to herself than to him. He shrugged a little. "It's okay. Nothing really happened." But she looked at him, and he could tell she didn't believe that. "Something did happen," she said softly. "They stopped you. They treated you like you were guilty before even knowing who you were. That's not okay." He didn't know how to answer. Part of him wanted to tell her he just wanted to forget about it. But another part, the part still shaking inside, wanted someone to say it wasn't his fault. She got up and paced slowly for a moment, her thoughts running fast. She wasn't just his mom. She worked in law enforcement, federal level. She knew how things were supposed to be done, and what she'd just heard broke every rule she believed in. "Did you get any badge numbers?" she asked suddenly. He shook his head. "I didn't think to. I just wanted to leave," she nodded. "That's okay. You did the right thing by staying calm." She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you for that. You handled it the best way you could." He looked up at her, trying to read her expression. "What are you going to do?" "For now," she said, taking a steady breath, "I'm going to find out who those officers were, and then I'll decide what comes next." He nodded slowly, trusting her. She always knew what to do. That night he went to bed later than usual, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flashing lights again. He could still hear the voice telling him to step out, the tone that made his heart race. His mom stayed up late in her office downstairs, her laptop open, papers spread across the desk. She typed quietly, checking police activity logs, patrol routes, and timestamps. It didn't take her long to find the probable match for the traffic stop. When she saw the officers' names, she leaned back in her chair, thinking carefully. She could confront the department first thing in the morning, but something told her not to wait. Something deep in her gut said she needed to see this through now. The next day started quietly, but tension hung in the air like fog. The boy woke up early, still feeling the weight of the night before. He went downstairs to find his mom already dressed, her expression calm but focused. "You have school today," she said gently. "Try to go about your day like normal. I'll handle the rest." He wanted to ask more, but one look at her told him she had already made up her mind. At school, he tried to act normal, but word spread fast. Someone in the neighborhood had recorded part of the traffic stop from a distance. The video wasn't very clear, but it showed him standing beside his car with the police lights flashing. Some students whispered about it in the hallways. A few asked him if it was really him. He just nodded and tried to move on. When he got home that afternoon, his mom wasn't there yet. He dropped his bag and sat by the window, staring at the street. The day had been long, but something told him it wasn't over yet. Later that evening, he got a text from his mom, "Heading your way." "Stay home," he replied, "Okay." He didn't know what she meant by heading your way, but the tone of her message felt serious. Outside, the sun had just set again. The streetlights flickered on one by one. He went to the kitchen, poured himself some water, and tried to distract himself with homework. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Then, about half an hour later, he heard that familiar sound again, the wail of sirens. He froze. Through the window, he saw flashing lights bouncing off the walls of the houses nearby. For a second, his heart sank. It couldn't be happening again. He went outside carefully, just enough to see what was happening down the block. There at the intersection, 2 police cars had pulled over another vehicle. He couldn't see who was inside, but he could hear the faint sound of voices. A minute later, his phone buzzed again. It was a call from his mom. "Are you outside?" she asked. He swallowed. "Yeah, I can see the lights again." "Stay where you are," she said firmly. "Don't come closer." Her voice was calm, but he could tell she was already moving. He stepped back inside, heart still pounding, and looked out through the window again. One of the officers was walking toward the car that had been stopped, and from the way the headlights hit it, he realized it looked just like his. For a moment, he wondered if this was some strange coincidence. He didn't know it, but his mom had already traced the same two officers from last night's incident. She had followed their route, and now seeing their car lights again, she knew exactly who they were. Inside the house, the boy paced slowly, phone still in hand. Every second felt longer than the last. He wanted to trust that everything would be okay, but after last night, he wasn't so sure anymore. When his mom's car finally turned onto the street, he could almost feel her presence before he saw her. The tires crunched softly over the pavement as she parked. The car door opened. She stepped out with quiet determination. She wasn't in uniform, but her badge hung clearly from a chain around her neck. He didn't hear what she said at first, but he saw how the officer's body language changed the moment she approached. From the window, he could see the tension in her shoulders and the way the two officers suddenly stood still. He didn't know the details yet. He couldn't hear their words, but he could sense what was happening. The same officers who had stopped him the night before were now face to face with his mother. And in that instant, the balance shifted. Whatever fear he had carried since last night began to fade, replaced by something else, relief, pride, and the beginning of understanding that sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest power. He didn't know what his mother would say or what would happen next. But for the first time since the flashing lights appeared behind him, he felt safe again. The night air was still, but it carried a quiet tension. The boy stood near the living room window, his heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the glow of police lights bounced off the nearby houses, painting red and blue streaks across the street. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't look away either. From where he stood, he could just barely see his mother's car parked a few feet behind the police cruiser. The door was open and she was already out, walking toward the scene. Even from that distance, her stride was steady and sure. She had a way of moving that made people stop and take notice, calm but firm, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The boy couldn't hear everything, but the tone of voices outside was sharp, quick, and uncertain. He pressed his hand gently against the glass, trying to catch a glimpse of what was going on. His mother reached into her jacket and pulled something out, a badge. She held it up clearly as she spoke. Even though he couldn't hear her words, the officer's reaction told him everything. One of them stepped back slightly. The other lowered his flashlight, his posture suddenly less defensive. The boy's mother said something else, and though he couldn't hear the exact words, her expression was serious, almost cold. She wasn't there as someone's mother now. She was there as a federal agent. And the officers knew it. Inside the house, the boy paced slowly. He wanted to go outside to be near her, but he remembered her words from the call. "Stay where you are." So he waited, trying to calm his breathing. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, though. Every second felt like an hour. Meanwhile, outside, his mother was standing only a few feet from the two officers. The streetlight above flickered softly, casting uneven shadows on the road. The flashing lights from the police car painted her face in alternating colors of red and blue, but her eyes stayed locked on them. "Can you tell me what this stop is about?" she asked evenly. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're conducting a routine patrol," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Routine? Because it looks a lot like the same routine you used last night when you pulled over my son for no reason." The two officers exchanged a quick glance. "Your son?" the taller one asked carefully. "Yes," she said, holding her badge higher so there could be no mistake. "He's a 17-year-old kid who was driving home from basketball practice. You made him step out of his car, searched his things, and then let him go without a single explanation." The shorter officer tried to keep his voice calm. "We were following a description, ma'am." "He matched what?" she interrupted, her tone sharp but still steady. "A description of who?" "What was your probable cause?" There was silence. The taller officer looked down, suddenly uncertain. She took a step closer, her voice firm but controlled. "You stopped a kid who did nothing wrong. You treated him like a criminal because he fit a description." I deal with this kind of language every day in my job, and I know exactly what it means when someone says that. The taller officer shifted his weight uncomfortably. Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. Intent isn't the point, she said firmly. The point is accountability. For a moment, no one spoke. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then she continued, her voice quieter now but cutting through the still air. Do you know how it feels for a parent to get a call or worse, a video, showing their child surrounded by flashing lights, not knowing what's going to happen next? He's just a kid. He's never been in trouble. And you made him feel afraid of something that's supposed to protect him. The taller officer opened his mouth but closed it again, realizing there wasn't much he could say. Finally, she took a slow breath, pulling herself back from the edge of anger. I want your names and badge numbers, she said calmly. They hesitated, but then, realizing she wasn't just any citizen, they complied. She took out her phone and noted them down. Her tone stayed professional, measured, precise, but there was no mistaking the emotion behind her eyes. When she finished, she turned slightly and looked toward the house. Through the window, she could see her son watching her. She gave him a small nod, just enough to tell him it was okay now. He exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. After a few more quiet words with the officers, his mother turned and walked back toward her car. The officers remained near their cruiser, not saying much. They seemed smaller now, unsure of what to do next. As she approached the house, she slipped her badge back under her jacket. The serious look on her face softened slightly. She opened the front door and stepped inside. Her son was standing there, waiting. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. Yes, I did, she replied, closing the door behind her. You deserved better than what happened to you. They needed to see that. He looked at her, unsure what to say. They looked scared when you showed them your badge, he said after a moment. She gave a faint smile. Sometimes authority only listens when it sees more authority. But that's not how it's supposed to be. Respect should go both ways. They both sat down on the couch. The flashing lights outside slowly faded as the police cars drove away, leaving only the quiet hum of the streetlights. For a while, neither of them spoke. The tension that had filled the air earlier now turned into something else. Reflection, maybe, or just quiet understanding. After a long pause, she finally said, You handled yourself well last night. You did everything right. You stayed calm, you didn't panic. I know it wasn't easy, he nodded, his voice barely a whisper. I was scared. I know, she said, gently placing her hand on his. And that's okay. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It means you care about your life, and that's something worth caring about. He looked down, blinking a few times. Is it always going to be like this? Her eyes softened. I hope not, she said. That's why I do what I do. So that maybe someday it won't be. She leaned back, staring out the window at the now empty street. When I joined the bureau, I wanted to change things from the inside. Some days I feel like I'm making progress. Other days, like tonight, it feels like we're still standing in the same place. The boy didn't say anything. He just listened. Sometimes silence carried more meaning than words ever could. After a while, she stood up and walked toward the kitchen, needing to move, to do something normal again. She poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to him. You have school tomorrow, she said softly, trying to bring the night back to something ordinary. He nodded, though he doubted he'd sleep much. She watched him quietly, her mind still replaying the image of the officers' faces when she showed her badge. The surprise, the sudden caution, it all told her something she already knew deep down. Too often, respect wasn't given freely. It was demanded only when power entered the picture. She didn't like that truth, but she couldn't ignore it. Later that night, when the boy had finally gone upstairs to bed, she sat alone in the living room. The clock ticked softly on the wall. She stared at her laptop for a long moment before opening a new document. She began to type. Notes about the incident, badge numbers, times, locations, everything she remembered. Not as a mother this time, but as an investigator. Her fingers paused over the keyboard for a second as she thought about how close things had come to going wrong. Then she took a deep breath and kept typing. Upstairs, the boy lay awake, listening to the faint tapping of the keys from downstairs. It was a steady sound, soft but constant, like the rhythm of safety. He knew his mother wasn't going to let this go quietly, and though part of him still felt shaken, another part felt something new. Pride. not because his mother worked for the Bureau, but because she stood up for him, for what was right, and for something bigger than both of them. He closed his eyes, finally letting himself drift toward sleep. Outside, the night grew quiet again. The world seemed calm, but deep down he knew that this calm wouldn't last forever. There would be questions, maybe even consequences. But for now, at least, he felt safe. And somewhere deep inside that safety, a small spark of courage began to grow, one that would change how he saw the world, and how the world saw him. The next morning started quietly, almost too quietly. The boy woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting thin lines across his blanket. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. But then he remembered last night. The flashing lights, the tightness in his chest, and the way his mother's calm voice cut through the noise outside. He got out of bed and walked downstairs. His mom was already dressed, standing by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. Papers were spread out across the table, police reports, case notes, and a printed copy of the department's patrol log from the night before. She looked up when she heard him. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. His voice still sounded tired. She smiled faintly. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" He shook his head. "You didn't either," she gave a small nod. "No, I had some work to do." He sat at the table while she checked her notes again. There was something about her today, focused, serious, but calm. It wasn't the same look she wore when dealing with everyday work. This was different. It was personal. "Are you going to talk to them?" he asked carefully. "I already made an appointment," she said. "This morning." He looked surprised. "That fast?" She nodded. "I didn't see any reason to wait." Things like this don't fix themselves. He wanted to ask if she was angry, but the truth was, she wasn't angry the way he expected. She was composed, almost cold in how focused she seemed. That made him nervous, but also proud. She glanced at her watch. "I'll be back later this afternoon. You go to school, okay?" He hesitated. "Do you want me to go?" "Yes," she said gently. "You need to live your life. Let me take care of this." He nodded. "Be careful," she smiled. "Always." By the time he left for school, she was already gone. At the police department, the morning light reflected off the tall glass windows. People came and went, some in uniform, others in plain clothes. The mother walked through the front doors, her badge visible, her posture straight. She knew these halls well. She'd worked with local departments many times during her career, but today wasn't about collaboration. It was about accountability. The officer at the front desk greeted her politely, not realizing who she was at first. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes," she said calmly. "I have a meeting scheduled with the watch commander and internal affairs." He typed something on his computer, looked up and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They're expecting you." "Room 214. She thanked him and made her way down the hall. Her footsteps echoed quietly against the tile floor. When she entered the room, 2 officers were already there, the same ones from the night before. Their faces stiffened slightly when they saw her. Sitting with them was a senior officer, a man with graying hair who looked like he'd seen everything and carried the weight of it. She introduced herself formally, even though everyone in the room already knew who she was. "Agent Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division." The senior officer gestured for her to sit. "We appreciate you coming in, Agent," he said carefully. "We heard there was an incident involving your son." "Incident," she repeated, her tone even but sharp. "That's one word for it," he cleared his throat. "We reviewed the preliminary report. It seems there was a misidentification." "A misidentification?" she said, leaning forward slightly. "Your officers pulled over a 17-year-old boy for no stated reason, made him step out of his vehicle, searched his belongings, and released him without charges. That's not a misidentification, that's misconduct." The senior officer sighed. "Look, I understand this is difficult, but you have to see it from our perspective. They were responding to a call. There was a report of a suspect in the area, and my son fit the description, correct?" He nodded. "That's what the report says." She sat back, her eyes steady. "You know, I've read that phrase in hundreds of case files. And do you know what it almost always means?" He looked down, not answering. She continued, her voice firm. "It means someone made an assumption based on what they thought they saw, not on actual evidence. And that assumption leads to moments that could destroy lives." The room went silent. Even the 2 younger officers didn't speak. They looked uncomfortable now, glancing at each other but saying nothing. "I'm not here to start a war with your department," she said, "but I am here to make sure this doesn't happen again, to my son or anyone else's." The senior officer finally looked up. "What exactly are you asking for, Agent?" "Transparency," she said. "Training, accountability, and I want an internal review of this incident." He nodded slowly. "I'll make sure that happens." "I'll hold you to that," she replied, standing up. Before leaving, she turned to the two officers. "You both wear that badge to serve and protect. I hope after last night you understand that protecting means everyone, not just the people who look like you expect them to." Neither of them spoke. But something in their expressions shifted, a mix of guilt and understanding. When she left the building, the morning sun felt brighter than before. She took a deep breath and stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of everything settle on her shoulders. Back at the school, her son sat in class trying to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting. Every sound, every phone vibration, every hallway announcement made him glance toward the door. He didn't know what was happening, but he trusted that his mother was doing what needed to be done. At lunch, one of his friends sat beside him. "Hey man," his friend said softly. "I saw that video online. That was you, wasn't it?" He looked down at his food and nodded. "That's messed up," his friend said. "You okay?" He gave a small shrug. "Yeah, my mom's handling it." His friend whistled quietly. "I heard she's with the bureau or something. Bet those cops didn't know who they were dealing with." The boy gave a faint smile. "Yeah, I guess not." But deep down he knew it wasn't about power. His mom wasn't doing this just because she could. She was doing it because she believed it was right. When he got home that afternoon, she was sitting in the living room, laptop open, typing up her report. She looked up as he walked in. "How did it go?" he asked. She gave a small nod. "They listened. I don't know if they'll change overnight, but they listened." He sat down across from her. "Do you think it'll make a difference?" "It has to," she said. "Every small step matters." They sat quietly for a while. The house felt calm again, but under the surface, both of them knew things had changed. The boy wasn't the same kid who left basketball practice 2 nights ago. And his mother wasn't just an agent today. She was a mother who had seen too much of the world to stay silent. Later that evening, there was a knock on the door. It was one of the neighbors, the woman who had recorded part of the traffic stop. She looked nervous but kind. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I posted that video online. People are talking about it. The news might reach out." The mother nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." "I didn't want to cause trouble," the neighbor said quickly. "But people should know what really happened." "You did the right thing," the mother said. "Sometimes the truth needs light to grow." After the woman left, the boy looked at his mother. "Do you think it'll go viral?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but that's not what matters most. What matters is that people are talking." As the night went on, the sound of typing filled the house again. The mother finished her report and closed the laptop. She leaned back and exhaled deeply. Her son was sitting nearby, scrolling through his phone. "People are sharing it already," he said. "Everyone's saying how brave you were." She chuckled softly. "It's not about bravery. It's about doing what's right even when it's uncomfortable." He nodded. "Still, I'm glad you were there." She reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "I'll always be there." Outside, the sky was dark again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. The flashing lights were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of crickets and the faint glow of the street lamp. The mother and son sat together, not saying much but understanding each other more deeply than ever before. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. Change never came quickly, but tonight, sitting side by side in their quiet home, there was something powerful in the silence. It wasn't fear anymore. It was hope. And that hope, small as it was, felt like the beginning of something bigger, something that might one day make stories like theirs less common. And nights like that one just another memory of how far they had come. The next few days passed slowly, but everything around them felt louder than usual. The phone kept buzzing with messages and notifications. The video of the traffic stop had spread everywhere, shared on social media, replayed on the news, and discussed by people across the city. Some called it shocking, others said it was nothing new. But for the mother and her son, it was deeply personal. The boy tried to keep up with his daily life. He went to school, talked to his friends, and even went back to basketball practice. But every time someone mentioned the video, he felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to be famous for something like this. He just wanted things to go back to normal. One afternoon, his teacher asked if he wanted to share his thoughts about what happened. "Only if you feel comfortable," she said kindly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet," he said softly. The teacher smiled gently. "That's okay. Take your time." When he got home that evening, his mother was sitting on the couch with the TV on. A reporter was talking about the story, about how a mother's courage had changed the way a police department was being questioned. The footage showed her standing strong in front of the officers, badge in hand, voice steady and calm. He sat down beside her, not saying anything for a moment. The room felt heavy again, but this time it was a different kind of weight. "They're making it look like some big movie scene," he said finally. His mother sighed. "That's what happens when things go public. People focus on the moment, not the story behind it." He looked at her. "Do you wish it didn't go viral?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I wish it didn't have to. But maybe it's better that it did. Sometimes people need to see what's real before they start to care." He nodded slowly. "Some people online are saying bad things too." She turned off the TV and faced him. "That's going to happen. Not everyone wants to believe the truth. But what matters is that you know it and you lived it. You stayed calm. You did everything right." He looked down at his hands. "It still doesn't feel fair." "It isn't," she said softly. "But you handled it with strength. That's something no one can take away from you." The next day, the mother was invited to speak at a community forum about policing and fairness. She didn't really want to stand in front of cameras again, but she agreed because she believed that staying silent wouldn't help anyone. Her son came with her, sitting quietly in the front row. The room was full: parents, teachers, police officers, and reporters. When she walked up to the microphone, the chatter stopped. She took a breath and began speaking. "I'm not here as an agent today," she said. "I'm here as a mother. What happened to my son could have happened to anyone's child. That's the truth we have to face. This isn't about blame, it's about responsibility." She spoke simply, without anger or fancy words. She told them what it felt like to get that call, what it was like to see her son standing by his car with fear in his eyes, and how fast things could have gone wrong. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled slightly when she said, "I've worked in law enforcement for years. I've seen both sides of that badge. But the day I saw my own child in that situation, everything felt different. I realized that even with all my experience, all my knowledge, I still couldn't protect him from a system that doesn't always see clearly." People in the audience listened quietly. Some nodded, some wiped their eyes. A few officers looked down, reflecting on her words. When she finished, the crowd stood and applauded, not because she was dramatic, but because she was real. She spoke like a mother, not a hero, and that honesty touched people. After the event, her son hugged her tightly. "You did good, Mom," he whispered. She smiled. "We did good, together." In the following weeks, things began to change slowly. The police department released a public statement acknowledging the incident. They promised to review their procedures and increase training on fair treatment and community trust. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. Reporters kept calling, but the mother decided to stop giving interviews. She had said what she needed to say. Now she wanted peace for her family. At home, life began to feel normal again. The boy focused on his schoolwork and basketball games. He still thought about that night sometimes. How scared he had been, how quickly everything changed. But he also thought about what his mother told him afterward. "Courage," she said once as they sat together, "isn't about fighting back. It's about staying calm when you have every reason to panic." He carried those words with him. Whenever he felt nervous walking home or driving alone, he reminded himself of that lesson. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from one of the officers involved in the stop. The handwriting was neat, the words short but sincere. It read, "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how my actions looked until I saw the video. I've been in this job a long time, but that night made me see things differently. I'm trying to do better." The mother read the letter silently, then handed it to her son. He read it twice, then looked up. "Do you believe him?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I believe people can change when they decide to. Maybe he means it. Maybe he doesn't. But if even one person learns from this, then something good came out of it. He nodded, folding the letter carefully and placing it back in the envelope. I think it means something, he said. That night they had dinner together, just the two of them, no reporters, no cameras, no noise. It was peaceful. They talked about school, work, and simple things. It felt normal again. After dinner, they sat outside on the porch. The air was cool and the streetlights cast a soft glow over the quiet neighborhood. You know, she said after a long silence, I used to think my job was about catching bad people, but now I think it's more about helping good people see the truth. He looked at her thoughtful. You think people will ever stop judging by how someone looks? She sighed softly. Maybe not completely, but we can keep trying to make things better. That's how real change happens, slowly, person by person. He leaned back and looked up at the stars. I guess you're right. They sat there for a long time, listening to the crickets and the hum of distant cars. It wasn't a perfect world, but it felt like a hopeful one. Weeks turned into months. The story faded from the news, replaced by other headlines. But for the mother and her son, it never really faded. It became a part of their lives, a reminder of what they'd been through and what they'd learned. Every once in a while, someone would recognize her at the grocery store or on the street. They would thank her for standing up and speaking out. She always smiled politely and said, I just did what any mother would do. And that was the truth. One weekend, the boy had a basketball game. His mother sat in the bleachers cheering quietly. When he scored the final point, his teammates surrounded him and she clapped proudly. After the game, he ran up to her, smiling for the first time in a while. Did you see that shot? He said excitedly. She laughed. Of course I did. You were amazing. For a moment, everything felt light again. No cameras, no tension, just joy. As they walked to the car, she put her arm around his shoulder. You've grown up a lot these past few months, she said softly. He smiled. I had to, she nodded. Me too. They drove home with the windows down, the evening air brushing against their faces. Music played softly on the radio, and for the first time in a long while, they both felt free. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something inside them had. They had seen fear, strength, and truth all in one night, and they had come out stronger for it. And even though life would go on, they knew that their story had left a small mark in the world. A reminder that fairness isn't about power, it's about humanity. As the car turned onto their quiet street, the mother looked at her son and said softly, No matter what happens next, remember, your story matters. He smiled back at her. Ours does. And in that moment, under the fading light of the setting sun, they both understood something important. Change doesn't start in courtrooms or headlines. It starts in moments like this, between people who care enough to make things right.